There is in your pack that you've got one of the Excel greenhouse gas calculators called 9.1A latest, and it's got NFERT after it. This is one that I have modified, so it's the latest version 11.0, that I've modified to allow you to put urea fertilizer that has nitrification inhibitors or urease inhibitors in them. They're highlighted in red, and I've got they're added by Cam Nicholson. And if you want to know, if you go to some of the other tabs, like the fertilizer and the leaching tabs, this is all the stuff that's sort of been built into the background to reflect that. I spoke to Richard Eckhart about it. He said this isn't far off going into the official tools. So this is a non-official one, but for any of the croppers that want to start to appreciate the likely impact or the likely credits or recognition that you get from using inhibitors, you can do that. And you simply do it by, if you had 300 kilos of urea in there, you'd change that to 200, and you'd say have 100 kilos of what you'd applied in with nitrification inhibitors on it. So the way it sits at the moment, that's exactly the output of it is exactly the same as what the greenhouse 11.0 version is that I've given you as a baseline. So it calculates exactly the same way. But if you want to play around with some of those inhibitors and see what effect it has, it's a simple way of starting to get a feel for the importance or the value in doing some of that stuff, cost aside, but from emissions and emissions intensity point of view. So that was the first one I just wanted to point out. For the livestock guys, won't matter too much because we don't use a lot of urea anyway. So it's not a big deal as far as that goes. The second one I just wanted to show you briefly, I mentioned about the AIA calculator. And so, here we go now. Sharing that, if I can get my screen back again. Just to give you a bit of a heads up on what it looks like. Now, you need to create an account to go into the AIA calculator. It's pretty easy to register. It's just a login password type stuff. When you first go into it, you can set up a property. So you would click on a thing up here called New Property. And what it does is allow you to locate where that property is. The reason for having the map at the start, or the thinking behind it, the map at the start, is that over time it will bring in location-specific information. So that will be things like silo data, so rainfall, climatic data, which will be used then to influence has leaching or runoff occurred. It will inform that rather than you saying yes or no to above or below 600 mil rainfall. There'll be some parameters set in that for those types of things. And also there's some work being done at the moment to look at what the maximum permanent storage level of soil carbon is, with the idea being that you should be able to get a map and it should be able to give you an indication of what that upper limit of stable soil carbon could be in a soil, so you know the gap. And we'll talk a bit more about this when we get to the soil carbon bit. But it's been designed in a way so that you can get some location-specific data and layers coming in as they evolve over time, which I think will be pretty useful. So when you click on a new property, you identify where your property is. Our property is called New Leaf, so I'll just show you our example here. So this is a working one at the moment. It's not a public one. So if you click on New Leaf, it will take you to the farm. It allows you to identify the parcels of where that your land is, and therefore we'll be able to cut and various bits of GIS type data and draw that into the map of where your activities are being undertaken. You then go into the business activities, which is a funny name for it, but anyway, that's what they've called it. And in the business activities in the enterprises, you can select the enterprises you want. At the moment, we've got a spring calving herd, we've got an autumn calving herd, and we've got a spring lambing herd. If you had cropping as well, you'd put cropping in there. If you had a feedlot, you'd put feedlot in there. You just add different enterprises to it. You can edit each of those, so you can have your starting and end for each of those. So you put in your starting and end date that you want to record from, so you're not fixed at a certain time. So your crop annual period or period of reporting can be different to your livestock ones, built into the same system. Just so we're building it so that you can reflect more what makes sense to you as a cycle in the system you're doing. So if you're at chooks and you were doing batches every 6 weeks or 8 weeks, you would be recording 6 or 8 week batches of each of those as they went through. You can turn on and off the different classes of livestock that you've got. Okay, but when you turn a class of livestock on, and in this case, this is the breeding side of it, and you go to edit livestock, unlike the spreadsheet that you've got, it will bring up each month and ask you how many animals, what the weight of that animal is. Has there any been changes from birth, deaths or aging? And aging means transferring from one age class to another. You can add sales and purchases in there. So when you click on that, it just asks you what year that was, what month it was, what class of animal it was. Was it a sale or was it a purchase? And the amount sold, and you can either calculate for you or you enter that directly into that. It also asks if it's a breeding operation, it'll ask you about when the cows start lactating. And you can also just put in key events. So if you wanted to sort of peg some of the key events, so you know, okay, we start calving in August and 25% had calved in August and 75% had calved in September, so it was a late August, September calving herd. You can just put those sort of things in, and you can put weaning in and you know, when you transfer a mob from one to the other, so you can track them on the way through. It's also got an option here for the month before you start to put a weight in, and that then will automatically change the inventory. So it will do an inventory adjustment for you, an inventory calculation, which takes out that big fluctuation that you can get in your emissions intensity calculation. So it's actually quite clever if you can put that in. Once you've done your first 12 months and you roll into the next 12 months, the last weight down here will be the weight that is entered in at the start up here. Okay, so once you've set it up once, it just rolls from one period to the next period to the next period. What I like about this is, even though it's a little bit tricky going backwards, you could start today and just say, right, I'm in October now, I know I've got X many of these animals, and you started that month, and then you just keep adding. And as someone suggested, and I recommend this to people, we do it every time we do our BAS statements, because we're handling sales and purchases. We just update our numbers over that 3 monthly period. It's also got a few clever features in it that if you've only got a live weight, say here when we weighed them and here when we weighed them, if you don't want to manually enter those, it will give you a linear change between those two and calculate the monthly weight change as part of that, because that's an important part of it. But you can override any of that as you see fit. And so things like when you click on auto fill blank and you know, things like that, it does a few clever things to avoid you making mistakes in your data entry. And there are alerts that come up if you've done things that look a bit odd as part of that. Okay. So that's part of it there. If we go back to there, you can also put trading in, works exactly the same way, but unlike the GAF tool that had the 3 columns, you can have as many columns as you like. You can change your different classes of livestock as you like. And even in something like this, in the sheep beef GAF calculator, you just had one lot for cattle, where here, if you had 4 or 5 different herds because they're doing different things, and in our example here, we've got a spring herd and a autumn calving herd, all of those things like when do you sell, what weights are they, when they start lactating, all of those sort of things are very different for the 2 herds. When you try and combine them, you've got to do a fair bit of brain power to make sure it works right in the old GAF tools, where here you just think of that herd and the things that are happening, and it will automatically piece those bits together. So it's reasonably clever like that. It showed you the trading. This is where you put your feed in. So did you use any of these sort of types of feeds as you were putting it in. And you can also change the quality of the feed. If you can remember, I made a comment about, depending on which state you pick, you get a default value for your the quality of feed that you've got or quantity of feed you've got if it's a sheep operation. But if I click into something like this, it says each month what's the protein and what's the digestibility for those. And it allows you to adjust if you want to for different classes of livestock. So you might say have weaner lambs that you're putting on high quality lucerne or chicory or something else that you've got for those few months that is a much better quality than what the cows might be getting. You can modify that so different classes of stock can be exposed to different qualities of feed. If you don't want to go through all the detail there, you just ask it to pre-fill it and it will pre-fill it, which is exactly what it's doing when you pick your state in the old GAF tools. So it's built off the GAF tools with a few other bits and pieces in it as well. I'll just scoot back now, just finally to make through some of these. It needs a few other buttons on it so you can return to different screens a bit quicker. It also allows you to put your things like your fuel in. And so if we said fuel and you wanted to add it, you just go in there and you can say when that was, when you bought it and the period that it's being used over, what sort of fuel is it, how much was it, and any notes that you want to put in. There'll be a paperclip that goes with that as well. So if you're getting receipts and things like that as PDFs, you can just attach them to it. So if you ever got audited, you've got all the evidence built into the system, so to speak, and it will just add it up over a period of time. And it does the same thing with your energy stuff, electricity, and all of those sort of things as well. Fodders, same sort of thing. If we go in and look at a fodder that I've put in there, you've got your different type of fodder that you've picked, how much it is, when you purchased it, all of those sort of things. So, and that will keep an ongoing inventory of the products that you've got over time. So you don't have to keep thinking about it and transferring it across each year. That will just flow through. And then the last bit is where you then allocate some of these things to the different enterprises. So if you looked at something like the fuel, it says how much goes against your spring calving herd, your autumn calving herd. So if you've built those different segments of your business beforehand, this will automatically pop up asking you what proportion goes to each of them over that period and how much has been used. So I think it's got lots of features in there that are pretty good. Then the calculation that comes out at the end, because I haven't completed this, but you'll get a printout of your scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions and other things, and we're looking at modifying the output report that you get here so that you can change that specifically for what you want, and you can specifically ask for a commodity. And so just let's look at the cropping bit of the operation and what were the emissions associated with that and so on. And you can export all of that stuff as well. You can change the dates on which you want to report. So you can pick start and end dates depending on whoever you're supplying to wants to know over whatever period of time. And you can pick your emissions based on which part of the business you want. So Rena's got some features in there which will make reporting much easier over time. I think better align with when we're handling some of this data, such as when you're doing your BAS statements and so on. So I think it'll be an important improvement. What I do like about it is when anything changes, so if things like the allocation of emissions from stubble or the percentage reduction you get if you use urease inhibitors on these fertilizers, if that changes nationally and internationally, it will automatically change in the calculator and it will automatically recalculate all of that in the background so that you'll be up to date. And as part of the reporting, you'll also be able to get reporting of trends over time. So when I showed you that emissions intensity line that we had over the last 15 years, you would start to create that year after year, so you can follow the trends of how your business is tracking. So I think it's a pretty exciting development. It's just had a few hiccups of having enough horsepower to keep it rolling and developing over time. It's had a few stop starts on the way through, but I think it should be pretty useful in that emissions calculation story. I'll just pause there if there's any questions.
Yeah, we've had one just in regards to whether you're able to upload a CSV file, about uploading other data from other platforms.
I don't know the answer to that. I know there was some discussion to saying, wouldn't that be good if we can? So link it to other platforms that could just export data and then pre-fill them. I think we're a long way away from that, unfortunately.
Just a comment around the apps that are partnering, and such as Peartree, that can upload data, Cam, as reported on the website, and the invite for other partners. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I should say that the whole idea of the AIA tool is that it'll have an API, so other platforms can readily use the engine, if you like, behind it, and the assumptions and the algorithms and all that stuff behind it. So you don't. I could see over time that other platforms, whether it's Peartree or other grazing, in particular, or even in cropping software that's there, will just include this as part of it. They will just be basically going to that website, pulling off the API and doing all the calculations. So it will show up in other software. Just how quickly that will happen, I'm not really sure. I'm more worried about getting the calculation right in it. And at the moment, when I'm putting data in it, it's giving me a different number to what the GAF tool is, and that's a coding issue of how things are working. So I'm focused a bit more. My bit of work with them is focused a bit more on making sure it's calculating right, and it's intuitive in the way, excuse me, you put information in. I haven't got to the next bit of how it will talk to other platforms and load stuff in. I think that's ultimately where it'll go. Just when that'll happen, I'm not really sure.
It's a question around data access, Cam, and whether it's done in a de-identified manner or how privileges might be given to that
data. As far as data sharing, you mean?
Or I think more just generally a concern, about how it might be used by the platform and others with access to it.
Yeah, okay. So at the moment, no one else has access to it, and the discussion was around a permission. So you would need to give permission for it to be shared with anybody. It's the way it was set up. I'd have to recheck that because I haven't revisited that for the last 6 months, but that's when it was originally being put together, was to do that. And if there was going to be any de-identified, any data used, it was going to be at a very high level. This is where the cropping industry is at, not overly specific. But I'd have to check that. I should say I'm not involved with AIA apart from being an external consultant that they pay when they ask for my feedback on it. So I'm not actually part of the project. I just get asked to do stuff because I've been doing a bit of it and I can pick up things that don't make sense or don't work right. So I'm not inside the inner workings of the whole thing, even though I've got some good relationships with people that are. But my understanding when it was first put together that the data privacy and the data on use was discussed and decided that it wasn't going to be, owned by AIA to sell on to other people or to be used for other purposes without permission.
That was a comment, Cam, around the option to not have your de-identified data utilised on the first page of registration.
Oh, is there? Yeah, okay. I've been in a back door 6-8 months ago when I set this up, so I'm not sure what a new user gets to see. Yeah. Okay, thank you, whoever that was.
That was Mel, yeah. So, understanding how big the issue of runoff is.
It used to make a big difference. In version 10.7, version 11, it makes far smaller difference, but still makes a difference. That's why I suggest to most people, I'd say no, answer no to, is there leaching or runoff, unless we've had some exceptional wet conditions. I don't know how nuanced this is going to get. And I'm a bit more comfortable that the discrepancy between saying yes or no is much less than what it used to be. You used to have a 17-fold difference of whether you said yes or no in what you got pinged for the leaching and runoff. Now it's only about 2.5 times or something. So it's a much smaller impact if you say yes or no to it. So I'm a bit more comfortable with that, but it's a very, very coarse measure. So I tend to say no unless it's been really wet or it's really obvious that it does leach. And if you've got part of your farm to do that, you can't answer sort of, you know. So I'd answer no.
It was in regards to nitrogen that's banked or stored down deeper, Cam, and how it might be treated, in the equation.
No, it doesn't treat it in the equation at all. It's the bottom line. So it doesn't care how much nitrogen you've actually got stored. The calculator's not good enough to be able to pick that up because of how it's evolved. They had no data on understanding of any of that at the state and national level. So it wasn't included in those sort of tier calculations. So at the moment, it doesn't matter. Basically, it doesn't matter. I think the questions that we're getting asked is the classic one of when you bring it down to the farm level, there's so much nuance that you really need at the farm level, and the tools are just not capable of doing that. And I don't know how they will, because someone has to go through all the effort of getting that, if you like, scientifically approved and accepted at so many different levels on the way through for it to be recognised in a calculator, that I think there's a lot of things we're just going to have to wear at the moment that are far from perfect, that we know aren't right. But if we're going to go ahead with it, we've just got to accept it. I know it frustrates me. Frustrates the hell out of me the way different things are treated and different way people say, oh, you can do it by just, changing this or just do a proportion of this or that. But everybody's making it up on the way through, and we somehow need to keep to some consistency in it, so that can be comparable.